Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening, this is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. In late October 2009, Cleveland police detectives arrived at the home of Anthony Sowell, an ex-Marine and registered sex offender, to arrest him on week-old rape charges. But this was no ordinary house, nor would it be a routine arrest. For even though Sowell was not at home, officers knew immediately something was horribly wrong. After initially finding 2 rotting corpses inside the home, their investigation would lead them to discover the bodies of 11 women. This is the shocking account of Sowell's legacy of depravity and cold-blooded murder. His mannered and well-spoken veneer masked a monster who felt no mercy for those he butchered. His twisted existence spent among the decaying bodies of his victims, and how he picked his victims from the fringes of society, lost souls with criminal records or drug habits that would make them less likely to arouse alarm if they simply disappeared. But that didn't mean they wouldn't be avenged. Nobody's Women. The book we're profiling this evening is Nobody's Women, The Crimes and Victims of Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland serial killer, with my special guest journalist and author, Steve Miller. Welcome back to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Steve Miller.
Hi, good evening.
Had a little gap there where I couldn't find my place in reading the script. Sorry about that.
It's all right. The silence is good. It's all right.
Anyway, I wanted to say we're those listening to in the audience this evening, you're in for a real thrill ride, because this is an amazing story and an amazing book. And so let's get to this question I often ask. I may have asked you this before when you're on the program. Without giving too much of the story away, what brought you to this story? Why were you compelled to write about this story, this serial killer, in this time and place in history? What brought you to this story in this book?
Well, you know, when this all went down, I was working on my second book, which was Girl Wanted, The Chase for Sarah Pender. And right. So my mind wasn't on what was going on in the news, and yet this story kept popping up. It was, you know, these bodies were being hauled out of a house in one of the worst neighborhoods in Cleveland, and being a Midwesterner, you know, I pay attention to that kind of stuff, and it looked to me at first, you know, I thought, well, this is just another grim mass murder. And but I'd find myself reading about it, and I think, well, who are these women? You know, who was he preying on? It started to attract me in that way. I said, well, who are these people? Who's getting killed? And so I started reading more and more about the victims, and then there were, you know, the allegations that the police didn't act on these people who had come up missing in this bad neighborhood. And I realized that this was a kind of a compelling story. About, you know, it had a little bit of, you know, some police work in it, some you know, obviously the horrific murders, and at the heart of it was a very depraved human being, Anthony Sowell. And you know, so it started to look to me like a challenge. You know, I dealt with really like kind of like mysteries and so on and so forth before. In this case, there was really no mystery. It was kind of like about a football game. It happened right in front of you, and so I thought I'd take that challenge, and hopefully I succeeded in Nobody's Women.
Right. Now, let's talk about Cleveland. You alluded to it, that it's one of the worst neighborhoods. So take us back to first. Let's do Anthony Sowell. Let's go back and take us back into his childhood. You did an admirable job of uncovering all available information about who this guy was and how he grew up to He was born in 1959, August 19th. His parents, Thomas Sr. and Claudia Garrison. Thomas Sowell. Tell us about his life growing up. Tell us what it was really like for Anthony Sowell, and what type of person was he growing up right from the very beginning?
Well, his father was a criminal. I mean, he committed numerous crimes in his life. He had done some time. He was a rough character, and he essentially had Anthony, and he'd never served as a father to him. And so Anthony was swung into kind of an extended family. He lived with cousins and so on and so forth, and his mother. And it was a rough upbringing for this guy, for Sowell. He had like a lot of people that are born into poverty and so on. He lived a rough life. There was a lot of sexual abuse. There was violence. It was a very rough, a terrible upbringing for him. And he, in fact, in the book, we talk quite a bit about how that worked and against him. And he was abused, and he did some abusing as well. It almost, at some points when I was writing about it, I thought, man, this is just like growing up in a house of horrors. It's almost unimaginable. And yet, Sowell managed to go to school. He grew up, he was kind of an outsider as a kid, but there was nothing apparent to his teachers or anything when he's, as he grew up. He had a high school girlfriend whom I spoke with at length in the book, and so he grew up in this very dysfunctional environment, and yet he managed to it seemed like he was going to get out of it. I mean, he joined the Marines. He joined the Marines before he graduated high school, and he really wanted to enlist, and so that's where we got to pre-crime. He got out of the Marines, and he served very, very admirably, sharpshooter as a matter of fact, and so that's where we got to up to his criminal activity, his known criminal activity.
Let's talk a little bit about the military. You say he was a sharpshooter, so he was a very good shot, an expert shot. Now, what else was what was he characterized? What were the reports like of his behavior? Was there any aberrant behavior when he was in the military? And did he was released with an honorable discharge? But tell us about what those reports said, if anything, during his military stay.
Well, he was a very good soldier. I mean, the bottom line, he was I guess his half sister Tressa at one point talked about how he went through a change, but really he it seemed like I guess what he went through was a bit of growing up. He went into the Marines and he wanted to, he got married. He had every sign of being, good. He had got a good conduct medal, a meritorious mass certificate, a sea service deployment ribbon, a certificate of commendation, and 2 letters of appreciation. As a military lawyer who later analyzed Sowell's military record said he did exceptionally well. So he came out of there really good. He served his last tour of duty at Camp Pendleton, and then he came home to Cleveland.
Now, what would a neighbor say, or people that grew up with him, or friends or family? How would he be characterized in terms of his character? Was he impulsive? Was he angry? Was he had a temper? Was he arrogant? What was he like in those regards?
People said, he was kind of I don't want to say he was kind of a weirdo. He didn't participate in a lot of sports. He did box a little bit, and he did a little bit of boxing, but he wasn't one of the kids that that was the popular kids. And so people knew him. They thought they tease him. Maybe he didn't get all the girls and that kind of stuff. But I don't know. It wasn't it wasn't anything that there was nothing at that point where it would stand out where he was where he was going to be a bad actor. So he was all right at that point.
Okay, now he got out of the military in 1985, is it? And
yeah. Yeah.
And what was he started to work almost immediately, or was he looking for work? Tell us what happened shortly after getting out of the Marines.
Well, he got back to Cleveland. You go home, and he he'd always liked to have a drink, and he always liked to smoke weed, but by this time crack had hit the inner city neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods were getting gradually worse and worse and worse, and so he came back, and everybody he knew now was smoking crack, and even the place that he grew up was filled with drug dealers, and so he just started, he was like a divorced 25-year-old guy, and at that point he had a 7-year-old daughter he had out of wedlock while he was in the Marines with his high school girlfriend, and he began drinking quite a bit, and it seemed like he was lost. He had an identity in the Marines, and now it seemed like he was starting to get a bit of a head case. He had, every day he was drinking. He moved into the attic of the house that he spent a lot of time in, that he kind of grew up in finally at some point, and just right down the street from his old high school, and it wasn't great. It wasn't great. The neighborhood was really, 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 really bad. He got arrested shortly after getting out on a domestic violence charge, served 8 days in jail. Things were going bad for him.
Now, what was he like before he entered the military, like say when he was a young man, as far as your research was in your book, and after the military as well, in terms of his sexual proclivities?
It was interesting. What was going on was, before he went in, as a youth, there was sexual abuse in the house, and according to witnesses, that is some half sisters and so on, he was an abuser, a sexual abuser of some of the girls, some of the siblings, the half siblings, the cousins in the house. So at that point, he had you look at it and you go, okay, this guy had already he had looked. It seemed like he was going to, he had some problems, some emotional problems, some obviously, he was abusive. It seemed that he kept it there. He didn't, he wouldn't act outside of that house. But yeah, so he had some aberrant sexual proclivities before he went in. But again, none of this had ever really come to the fore. He was never, nobody ever noticed it. I'm guessing, and he was in an environment where it didn't matter. Nobody's going to notice that kind of thing. And he had, like I said, we had an 88 domestic violence charge. His half sister talked about, how he punched a girl in the neighborhood, I guess, after he got out, and she had said how he was getting in trouble now. He got popped for possession of cocaine, and he's public intox, disorderly. He was getting in trouble. It was heading towards a bad way.
Now, after he was on this downward slide, smoking crack, and really his life falling apart, once an upstanding guy that could hold down an apartment and a job, and he wasn't doing that anymore.
Right.
So now what was his sexual proclivity characterized by? Who did he interact with? Did he have a girlfriend, and did he just cheat on his girlfriend? What did he do? Who did he
No, man, he didn't have any, he got out of there, and he didn't really have a girlfriend. He was living a street life, and it was going pretty badly for him, and it kind of hit a wall. 1989. In 1989, he assaulted a woman. He had taken her off the street. Now, it depends on what you believed, but so this is a woman, and it's in the book. I go into kind of in depth. I interviewed this woman. Yep. This was his first victim. This was really the first time she'd been interviewed. I tracked her down in inner city Cleveland. It was tough, but she told me her story, and and then I read the reports. But what had happened was this woman was out early one morning, after a long night on the town, ran into Sowell on the street, and this was to be repeated numerous times then over the next in the future. And he talked her into coming back to his place. He was living in the upstairs apartment, the attic apartment at a house that his family was still living in. A lot of nieces, nephews, et cetera, and he took her back there, and he got her in there, and he snapped and began to violently attack her. He raped her repeatedly, tied her up, and it was he brutalized her, and she was lucky enough to escape with her life.
Tell us more about this, because this is telling. Because
it is. Yeah.
I mean, it is really telling for his sort of MO and his signature and everything else, I would gather. Tell us more about how she actually escaped from this maniac.
It is interesting, because as I looked through the book when it was done, I read through and I said, well, I unconsciously foreshadowed by kind of led with this assault. And so what had happened was, they got up there, and as soon as he got the victim into his room, and she told me, she said that he was nice, he was not a creep, and they were talking about stuff, and she claims she wasn't going up there just to have sex with this guy, but with Sowell. But as soon as she got in there, Sowell slammed the door, and she said right in the book, she said, I looked at him and he changed his face, his look. And she said to herself, you're in trouble. And he locked the door, dragged a heavy suitcase in front of the door so she couldn't get out, and he pulled out a knife. And he held her captive for 12 hours. And again, this would be repeated down the line some years later. Then he tied her up, and he took a nap. And then he woke up and he tried to choke her out a little bit. And he told her he was going to kill her, and he said, but he's going to go to sleep first. He's too tired to kill her at that point. And he lay down next to her on the bed and was asleep in seconds. And there was an attic, and it had a tilted window, but she saw it, and this victim, and she said she could do it. She could get out of this. And she said to herself, she said, I'd rather die jumping. She'd rather die trying to get out of here, because she was sure he was going to kill her. He was enraged. And she did. She managed to get out, maneuver through this little tiny window onto the roof, and called to some women in front of the house. And they called the police. She was tied up. She showed them her hands. He had bound them with a necktie. And she didn't want to scream, because she didn't want to wake him up. But within minutes, everybody, the cops showed up.
Now, how did the police react to this, and what was the subsequent charges, if any? What happened as a result of this? What was the interview like with Anthony Sowell as well? What did he have?
He was arrested. He was arrested, and of course, what happened was later on, the case didn't go right away. The victim disappeared, and so once the victim disappeared, and so there wasn't a case made. However, not a little bit in the future, a few months in the future, another assault occurred. And this time again, he was detained, and now they found the warrant for the East Cleveland rape, and now he was prosecuted, and that was it. In 1990, he got 5 to 15 years for that previous rape.
And he was listed as which is important to this story, very, very important to this story. We might as well talk about this a little bit. He's registered as a sex offender, which is supposed to mean that he would have his DNA sample taken at that time and put into the federal data bank. Is that it? Tell us about it.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. And once in prison, of course, you'd have to get sex offender counseling. And one of the prisons he was in over the 15 years that he spent, he was offered advanced sex offender treatment, but he never, ever underwent any treatment.
Why is that?
Because he told a state sex offender counselor that he denied, he didn't do anything. He never committed the offense. So he, essentially that's how that prison was run. Is, you didn't do it? Okay, fine. I know you're convicted of it, but if you didn't do it, then they let him slide with that.
I see. They wouldn't treat him for something if he said
right.
he was.
Right. Now, again, to be treated for a problem, I guess they'd want him to admit that he had the problem, but.
Sure.
But at the same time, he said he didn't want to take these because he would make him a target. Sexual offenders, of course, are scorned among inmates, and so he didn't want to be marked as a sex offender. That's a rough rap in prison. So he just didn't take the classes, and he took other things. He took things like anger management and so on and so forth, but and alcohol treatment and so on. But really, what he did in prison was he worked a lot. He worked in the kitchens, and he did the electronic wiring for snow removal trucks for the prison system, and did some engine repair. Again, he thrived in prison because, again, it was an institutional living. He could he could get by, he could get past everything because this is what he liked. He liked being told what to do and how to have an order in his life.
And plus, he was a sober Anthony Sowell when he was in prison and when he was in the military, or in the Marines.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, and this also played a role. He was, he didn't mess around with contraband. He didn't do anything. He had a pretty good record. I think he had a couple tickets in prison. That was about it.
Was his family supportive or any members of his family supportive while he was in prison?
They went to visit him periodically.
Okay, so he wasn't banished from the family or anything.
No.
Now,
no.
How many years of that 15 years does he ultimately do?
He served all 15. In fact, as they tried to, you'd always be up for parole, but he was denied every time. It was a really, really tough. When you read the reports, and in the book we talk quite a bit about these reports. I like to rely heavily on records when I'm writing, and you can see in there, exactly. And in fact, these will be up on some of these reports will be up on my website coming up here. Book comes out on October 2nd, so we'll have these up for people to read. But nobody was. It was the savagery of the crime just didn't disallowed his early release. It would have been crazy.
Right. So the 15 years also means, though, when he finishes that he's not on any mandatory parole or probation. So no. That's
right. He is a registered sex offender, though.
Right. Now, how does that work? He's supposed to register, and how does that all work out in Anthony Sowell's case?
It worked out. I mean, he got out, and he got out and he registered. I mean, like he was supposed to do. He got out, I believe it was June, and he got out and he went down to exactly where he was supposed to be, down at the Court Psychiatric Clinic in downtown Cleveland, and at the Justice Center, and he showed up. Everything was, this is what he was supposed to do. He had pled guilty to 2 counts of attempted rape and served his prison sentence. He got a job as soon as he got out, and he worked over at the Cleveland Indians ballpark for a while, and he later told me it was the best job he ever had. For what that's worth. But September of 2005, he went down. He got out in June 2005. About September 2005, he went down and underwent his sexual predator evaluation.
And what was the results of that? What was the conclusion?
He was determined to be a fairly low risk to reoffend.
And again, this is determined by him denying that he is a sex offender and someone believing that? Is that the way that worked?
Yeah, I mean, he when you read the report, it's fairly, you read everything that he said. He denied a whole lot of things, and he talked about his sexual history and so on. He said his first sexual contact was with his then girlfriend at age 17, and said he'd never been involved in violent sex, these kinds of things. He said, and so and he said. In fact, he told him he never used cocaine or anything. He said he used marijuana, and so he gave him his story. I mean, what the story, maybe what they wanted to, what they wanted to hear. It talked about. They talked about he was, at the end of it, they said he just had a low. They said he was a. I guess they said he was a well-functioning. He was decently functioning man. And what they have there's a test, and I hate to get into these, bogged down in these things, but he said it says 7%, 6% that of reoffending in 5 years, 7 in 10 years, and 7% in 15 years. Yeah. So really, they gave him a fairly low probability. Okay,
so he's out in 2005, you say, and
he's out working.
And where is he now working after the Cleveland Indians gig?
He went to work for a couple different places. He had a couple jobs. Then he finally went to work though at a rubber works place. It was a manufacturing job, and he really liked that. He really dug it. He liked working. That was the main thing. But so that's where he was. So he actually went. He lived first with his half sister. He then moved into this old house, 12205 Imperial, which becomes a huge part of the story. In fact, in the book, you'll see it'll refer. It keeps going 12205. Everything comes back to 12205. It was a family that was in the house forever, and at that time, his father had kind of quit drinking and become kind of the local handyman. He was kind of he's kind of like an old. He's kind of the old hood who kind of reformed, and he's too old to be carrying on anymore. He had remarried. He married a woman that kind of calmed him down and everything, and but the thing was, while Anthony was in prison, he had died. So now his stepmother was living there, and Anthony moved in with her. He lived at 12205 Imperial now, and he was working a job, and that was it. It was a tough neighborhood, really tough neighborhood.
And there's important too that there's maybe you can describe the neighborhood in terms of the adjacent stores and businesses that become part of the story later. That's kind of a grim, irony basically. What's across the street? Ray's Sausage. Tell us.
Right next door to 12205 Imperial is a sausage factory. Been there forever, and so. And then just beyond that, across the street, on the same side of the street, on the corner, was a beer store, a convenience store, and there were some other things. There's a little eatery across the street, and the thing that strikes you when you go to that neighborhood is it's one of those urban neighborhoods that just fell apart, man. I mean, over the years, it used to be a beautiful neighborhood, and it just again fell apart. A lot of drug dealing, a lot of drug, just the whole gamut of street life.
Now, this building on this home on Imperial Drive, he lives. Is it 3 stories? Where does Anthony?
That's right. It's a three-story, a beautiful old home. And it's a 3-story building, and his mother lived downstairs, and eventually, at first Anthony lived in a back bedroom on the first floor, and then he moved up to the 3rd floor. So he had his own little apartment. He actually kind of fit it for himself. He put in some new plumbing and so on and so forth. So, So he kind of just moved in. He was working at the place called Custom Rubber. He could walk to work, or he took the bus, and he turned into a fix-it guy. He was fixing things around the neighborhood. He met some girls. He'd see him out on the stump, drinking a 40, and they'd come by, and so on and so forth.
So again, he wasn't a creepy guy. He was a guy known in the neighborhood as a decent guy, hardworking guy, normal guy. Isn't that the impression that people had about Anthony Sowell, basically?
People did have that. He fronted well. He could talk. He could talk a little bit. He loved sports, so you could have a conversation with this guy. He loved to cook, and if he ran into a former military person, he could talk about the military. So this guy was fronting well. But that's also what the problem is when somebody does. It's the scary people that confront well and present well that turn crazy on you. That's the monster.
Now, he was a sort of a bigger guy, 5'11", sort of a muscular guy,
stocky guy. Yeah.
But this many years of doing crack, or at least at what point does he sort of get down to sort of a leaner, sort of a more of a gaunt figure because of the crack? After a couple of years there, he had met a woman, a woman named Lori. And she was into crack, and he picked up the habit pretty heavy through her. He had already dabbled, and now he began. People started coming by the place. Shady characters started coming over, that kind of stuff. And hard drugs are pretty selfish endeavors. So he was secretive and that was that. He was getting high, and his girlfriend started to realize it. How was his behavior? Was there any erratic behavior once he was high on crack or coming down off crack? Did Lori have any incidents with police or assaults or violence with Anthony Sowell?
Lori was a big user, and yeah, I mean, people started coming over, and they started, Lori was getting in trouble. She was always kind of getting in trouble. She had a pretty extensive rap sheet, and so they were getting high together some of the time, and Anthony was hanging out with some other people in the neighborhood, and so. It was pretty bad. He was getting pretty high pretty often, pretty frequently, and Lori was not exactly aiding and abetting, but she wasn't really a big help. It's not like she's going to help him out and try to pull him out of this. She got popped for crack not long after they met, and it got he tried to help her. But he wasn't much of a help, and things were going south for him pretty quick because the relationship was starting to fall apart. This is a very important relationship to Anthony Sowell.
Why is it an important relationship to Anthony Sowell? What is it about the relationship and what it represents to him? Why is this so important?
I think something finally touched Anthony Sowell, that he felt something for someone, and you could read between the lines. You read about things he said, people he talked to, and so on. And this guy was kind of he had such it's such a stew of personalities. And I think it appeared that he had really, really, truly had his own version of love for Lori. But it was a very possessive love, of course, and because it seems to be fairly common, people like him, and is obsessive, and so as she started to fade away out of his life, he began to feel loss, and that angered him. He was getting high more and more. They would fight. They would have physical scraps and so on. and he'd throw her out and then beg her to come back, et cetera, et cetera. But, nothing good's going to come of it. They're both using.
So what does come to pass with Lori and with Anthony? What does she come to her senses at some point? Does she get beat up? What
She
happened?
leaves. She leaves. It was she left, and in February of 2007 she was gone. They were still talking. They were on again, off again. They were but they were still talking. And Anthony had a heart attack. He was shoveling snow, and it would seem that the drugs he had taken had weakened his heart, and he had a heart attack. And he was operated on. He nearly died. He was into in the critical ward at the Cleveland Clinic, but he was kind of covered. He tried to come back to work and he couldn't work, and now Lori's gone, and he had to leave. So there he was. He he had no job. His girlfriend had left him, and he was a mess.
What reason did Lori give for finally breaking up with Anthony? What reason did she give him?
She was trying to get her life back together, and she couldn't with him. He was getting unemployment. Things were really, really terrible for him.
Did she see a violent side?
She did. Of course, they had physical scraps, and so she was. She knew. Everybody noticed how much that how much the two fought, and so on. So,
but she was a scrapper herself, though. To be fair, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Of course, yeah. This is a rough place. But what's going on here is something's going on in his head. Things are. You got to remember, this is a neighborhood where people knew each other. Everybody knew each other. They all got high together, and so he was a guy. Again, he was still a guy that was around. Now he didn't have to work, so he was really around. He was a scrapper. That is, he would pick up scrap metal and take it in. That's how he got some money. He would get unemployment, and so on and so forth. So, and he still had a crack habit. He was still smoking, heart attack or not. Then things, so now with Lori pretty much out of the picture, the girlfriend, he's kind of on his own, and he's hanging out with the locals, smoking crack,
Now the women some of the prostitutes that and I hate even using that word because it's just these are drug-addled victims.
That's right. You're right. These are people who aren't in their right minds. But they have been busted. Some of them had prostitution charges. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, there's some run-ins. There's obviously that's the main thing. If you look at all these people that they've had run-ins with the law for drugs, and then some other minor things, I guess. But imprisonment for drugs, drug use, and continued drug charges. But now the thing is, Anthony Sowell was born in 1959, and we're talking about in the end of the 2000s, so we're talking, what year are we talking? 2007?
2007. We can go right to it. This is where things kind of began.
Now, I wanted to ask you just to set the stage, because you do this in the book itself. Is these women coming into the area because drugs are being sold primarily in that area, and then that's how Anthony is meeting them? How is he meeting them on foot? What club is he going to? How is he meeting these people, and why are they in this area? And tell us about his behavior after Lori leaves and his life continues downward. It's a wide area in Cleveland, and Anthony was a walker. He liked to get out and he'd walk all the time. He'd ride the bus, but he'd also walk a lot, and this is one of those things. He's just kind of a wanderer. So
he'd get out and he'd meet people at bus stops and so on, and he'd see people out. He'd get to know people. And it was kind of the neighborhood. Of course, yes, it had a lot of drug traffic. It also had a lot of places to live, cheap places to live. It was close in. Again, it was an urban community of dysfunction. You know, it was like a lot of areas in a lot of cities in America, and it was a tough area. But if you wanted to score drugs, you could go down there, and if you had a habit, that was a good place to be. So yeah, he was hanging around, and he was having problems. There was something going on in his head, and so he knew. People. Some of these people that ended up eventually turning up missing had been to his house. They'd hung out at his house before socially, and so on. So that's where we were headed. But
so
about 2000. Go ahead.
Now tell us what starts happening in terms of Anthony Sowell and his victims in terms of people disappearing from this area. Tell us about the first victim and police response and what happens as a result. Well,
the first, there was a young lady named Crystal Dozier, and she's from the area. She'd had a rough life, long list of arrests. She had some children, number of children. Some were adopted by a family, and so on. But and she had a couple. One child in particular who did very well, a son who was a Marine, and so on. And but on Mother's Day, Crystal called her mother to wish her a happy Mother's Day, and she was never seen again. She had been living about a mile from the house on Imperial, and they went over to the family. The son, who was in the Marines, came into town, and he came home and tried to find her. And then he went over to the 4th District Police Station. It was a police station in a tough part of town, and they said, he told the police, he told the police about, his mom's missing, and the cops told him he'd get a report in 3 days, and he never got a report. We can put this in perspective a little bit. These are people, street people. They're missing all the time. They might be turned up missing for a week. They might turn up missing for a month, and they show up again. Cops oftentimes don't take this stuff real seriously, and it's very common. They obviously now know that they do it at their own peril by not taking a missing persons report, seriously. Right. They risk the possibility of somebody like Sowell carrying on. But in this case, this is what happened, and she disappeared Mother's Day. That was the last she was seen.
Now we've got to put this in perspective too. This is a black neighborhood. These are black victims as well, right?
That's correct.
Normally, not that I mean, it's a black serial killer is rare. We'll get to that. Anthony Sowell's black, and so anyway, this is another. Again, it's going to come up a little bit later about this race. Race will be an issue. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, or at least someone will try to make it anyway.
Right.
So now what's happening in terms of the neighborhood itself is this Crystal, again, she's a block away from Imperial, from Anthony's home there. So what happens as a result of Crystal going missing? What do the police have in terms of leads? And then how does everyone proceed?
Well, the police really have nothing. They don't really proceed. But what does happen, though, is a couple months later, people said that there's a smell in the neighborhood, and over the years there'd been smells. It's a city; it smells, and only this time, people are saying, this is not, maybe it's not it smells like a dead person, and people had said dead animal, whatever. And the city looked into it, and they came over to raise sausage. It was right in that area, and they went over there, and they told Ray, the sausage, the guys that ran Ray's, they had to clean their traps. Do a lot of work to clean up their traps.
Right.
It was a sausage manufacturing. Really, sausage smells good. So it was hard to say what they were trying to do. They were just kind of looking, and they were trying to find out what was going on.
Right.
But about the thing was, you got to remember too. He was still going on and off with Lori. So so things were things were really bad for him, but things were still on and off with her. So she'd come by. And she came by, and one night she says, he's all beat up, and she wondered what was going on with him, and he just said he got attacked. Someone tried to rob me. Early 2008, she came home and found him. He was all bloody, and there was blood on the walls and so on, and he had tried to clean it up, and he said, I got someone tried to rob me. That's how he said it. But I beat the guy up. It was cool.
Didn't he say he killed them or took care of them?
What did he say? He said, he said he killed them, but but I don't know about that.
Right. Sure. Part of the story. So
I think that's macho talk.
Sure. So how did she react to this? Him being attacked in the home was, again, par for the course, or not such a big deal? How did she respond?
She was worried. She wasn't living there, of course, because
right.
But because but she was she was concerned. She was kind of worried about it because at the same time she had her own problem. Her mom was sick, and she was actually beginning to get her act together. But it seemed like every time she was going by the house over there, she'd stop by and see him. Something was messed up with him, he was cut or something like that,
Right. Now in the neighborhood, the people that know each other, and a lot of these people knew of each other. Let's put it that way. What happens in this neighborhood? Is anyone on alert? Is there rumors circulating in the neighborhood? What's happening at this time other than the smell is starting to smell?
Eventually, and this was, people began to chat about, that, and this is, it was slowly gathering, beginning about 2007, that he was, and nobody really talked about it too much, but there were rumors that this guy was, beating up girls and raping girls, but nothing. Women were going missing. Nobody put anything really together. Women were going up missing, and but he I don't know. It was interesting that it hadn't really hit a peak yet. Lori was distracted because of her mother dying. She went back to jail, and she had all kinds of problems, and she blew off a court date, and she was popped, and so finally she left him. She left him for good. They had a big argument, and she called him a rapist. She was hearing the same things, and she moved out. That was it. That was about August 2008. So they'd been on and off for about a year, and now it was just over.
Now, in terms of Imperial Drive, when is it? If I'm jumping ahead, just let me know, and we'll slow it down. But when is it that he uses the second floor rather than the third floor, which is unusual because he's done all this renovating to the third floor, and then the second floor really doesn't it's bare bones and there's nothing there. Tell us about that, if that's not jumping the gun.
No, I mean, we can proceed. People had people had started to disappear. I mean, now we're getting to 2008. People started disappearing at a fairly rapid rate, and just not turning up, man. And it was really, and these were all drug users, just about, and they were really, they were really a mess. And so, one night he had a friend over, somebody he knew, a girlfriend he knew, and they went up. Instead of going up to the third floor, she said, "Why don't you come over? We'll go up to the second floor." And she wondered why. It would later be figured out why, but he was the only one in the house now because his mom had gone to live with her daughter and spend time in the hospital because she was dying, and so she couldn't figure out why they were partying on the second floor, and this was he would attack this woman. Now we are getting a little bit ahead because everybody was disappearing. And we'd later find out that there were bodies up on the third floor.
So what happens? Tell us about this woman. Then it does get attacked, and what happens as a result? And how many women had disappeared by this point?
I'm trying to remember here. If excuse me for not being, when you get to so many people,
sure.
Disappearing, you can't remember. By that point, I think we'd had quite a few, perhaps even, I think we're at like 10, maybe. We're at 10 people. We're way up there. By the time that happened. But we're getting into a point where a woman goes up, an old friend, and she had even actually procured drugs in the past for Anthony Sowell, and she was a heavy addict. She went up there, and that's when they wanted to she went over and she wanted to hang out up on the third floor. She couldn't understand it. They set in a couple of straight back chairs, and there's and so, she wondered what was going on. And at any rate, they were talking, and all of a sudden, again, he flips on her. And she starts talking to him. She says, "Some girls around here have been talking about you. They say you're a rapist or you assaulted them." And boom, he punched her, straight up. And told her to take off her clothes, and he assaulted her. He tied her up he tried to strangle her with an electrical cord, and she woke up, and he was apologetic and let her go. They were friends, remember? She went out. She said, "Okay, yeah, cool." He's like, "Hey, come on back, and we'll party later." He said, "Okay." She's like, "Yes, that's okay. That's cool." She left, and she pulled some mail from the mailbox and had his address, and she went in and reported it. She went to the emergency room. She talked to a counselor. The counselor there said they already knew of him. She told me. And that's where things started to get, that's where the warrant eventually came from.
Now they got a warrant based on this person's evidence, this person's testimony, or the information she gave police. Now, what happens with the execution of the warrant? Do we allude to that, if people remember at the very beginning, at the introduction of your book? So basically tell us how they got this warrant and what the warrant was for, and then proceed from there.
It was a probable cause affidavit, and it just simply said that he forced this woman to engage in sexual conduct, strangled her with an extension cord, and raped her while she was unconscious at the home at 12205. And it was for a sexual assault, but they sent a SWAT team. I think it was 13 members assigned to the warrant. They went up. It was a two-family home with a basement, a third floor, and they went up. The first floor wasn't included in the warrant. Third floor was noted as his residence. Boom, they went up there. He wasn't there. Went down, did the thing you see on cops all the time. You're going through each room. Boom, boom, boom. They found a crack pipe, some pot in his room, mail addressed to him. They had the right house, of course. And They went down to a room at the end of the hallway, and there was a smell, and they kicked in the door, and the officer saw a couple of people to his left. They had the lights on. It was dark up there, but they had the lights on. He drew his weapon, and he looked, and they were two bodies. Women. One had a clover-shaped silver pendant necklace on her, and the other one had a white dress pulled up to the waist. Their feet were wrapped in a garbage bag. And they had found two bodies, and that was that. It turned quickly into a murder case.
And those are two women that they identified fairly quickly?
Later to be identified as among the 11 missing.
Yeah. Okay, so now the police have the ability to search wherever they want. Now they probably have the motive to search places that they wouldn't normally search, like in backyard.
That's right. They go back and they get a heftier warrant, and now they can, they've got probable cause to search the entire place, and that's when the bodies start turning up. They're in the yard. They're in the basement. There's another one in the crawl space up there. And
basically the same method of strangulation, electrical cord, extension cords.
Yes, ligature strangulation. They're finding jewelry. They're finding cell phones. They're finding clothes. It's grim. It's just a terrible scene, and it's a very very gory scene.
Now, is there early evidence that there is prolonged? Once these women are kidnapped, is there some torture, and is there any evidence of that as well?
The advanced decomposition made it even hard to tell a time of death, but there was evidence that there was abuse of the bodies, and so on.
Right. Now, Anthony Sowell is not at the home. So where is Anthony Sowell, and how does he eventually, again, this is another just twists and turns, how does he get arrested?
He's at his half-sister's, Tressa's, and a neighbor saw the cops over at his house over on Imperial. His half-sister lives just a few blocks away, and she goes over there, and she knows he's over there, and she goes over there and says, "Listen, the cops are at your house," and he kind of, says, okay, and next thing you know, he disappears. He's gone. He's gone for about 48 hours. And it's Halloween, and a guy's out in the daylight, and he sees this guy. There's a $12,000 reward. He sees the guy. This guy has a real sharp eye. He sees Sowell walking down the street, and he goes in, and he goes into the 4th District Police Station, the same one all these people have been reporting the missing bodies to, the missing people to, and the cops go out and they find him right away. And there's a car right around the corner from where the suspect was, if Sowell was, walking down Mount Auburn, not far at all, and they started asking him, cop asked him who he was, and they said, he said, you got me last night, and he didn't know what he meant, meaning he'd been stopped and questioned the previous evening. And they searched the backpack, and he had a backpack with him. They found a box cutter and a wallet and a piece of carpet. And Anthony said his name was Anthony Williams. And they said, well, listen, we're going to just take a real quick fingerprint, and you'll be on your way. And that's when he freaked out, and he said, I'm Anthony. And he said, Anthony Sowell, I'm the guy you're looking for, Anthony Sowell. And that was it.
And there was two fortunate cops right there when he admitted who he was.
Exactly, two lucky cops. And the one thing he told the cops was, I just want to die.
Yeah, well.
Well, he got his way because he's sentenced to death last summer. Summer of 2011, he was sentenced to death.
Well, it's amazing, the trial. I mean, what's very unusual, as true crime readers know, that for someone to take the stand, a killer to take the stand, especially when the evidence is like this, or wanting to take the stand even, is incredible. So,
yeah, that was a unique twist in the trial, but the account of that in the book, I thought that was actually interesting to write. Just about, I've never had to write about like that kind of thing. The trial was tragic. It was terrible because you had to hear, testimony from these victims, and they were totally traumatized, and you really saw the effect that he had, the horror that he had wreaked, and it was tough. It was tough. It was a tough book to write, and these others. No crime is a pleasant thing, but this was a really, really extra tough one because of the number of victims and just hopefully we did him justice in this, and
Well, the thing is, all you can really do is tell the truth, and so you're not going to beat up on them being judgmental, and you certainly aren't judgmental to anybody, but you have to depict reality as it is, and it's a harsh reality, but a lot of people know that it didn't always come from silver spoon upbringing, so a lot of people know that there's the darker side of any neighborhoods or any city, big or small, and people can end up on the other side of the tracks pretty easy. It doesn't take much.
It's very true, and it's part of that street culture. And the main thing I think, and I hope I made that point, is what, they had a lot of transgressions, but they didn't deserve to die.
No, they were basically drug addicts and victims and vulnerable, and that's why Anthony Sowell took advantage of them. What I wanted to say, too, about this is that these people all were in their 40s and had, extensive criminal records, but, again, they seemed to be short, prison records
That's right.
For drug possession and continued drug use, or, again, if it's drug trafficking, it's probably smaller amounts. So these people were really just, they had hard lives. A lot of these people had, as evidenced in your book, 8 families banded together for lawsuits to try to.
That's right.
And it tried to gain support by having those 8 families. Who else could empathize and identify or relate to what these people were going through with these women dying and then having Anthony Sowell? They had also said, which is interesting in your book too, is that the 8 families had approached the prosecutor and said, listen, we would like life without the possibility of parole. We don't want a circus here. And didn't really want the death penalty. But tell us how the state and the county proceeded.
Well, that is interesting. They filed a petition, and they didn't want to go through the trauma. They knew what kind of trauma with this trial would bring, and they said, we don't want to do this. We don't want to go through this. This is, why do we want to do this?
But sorry to interrupt you, but they also wanted this. Didn't they also want this because they wanted a full account of what actually he had to? Part of the deal was he had to state exactly what he did. So in terms of for the families and for the police themselves, they wanted a true account of what actually happened here.
Well, right. But I mean, I think that the thing was I guess the main thing was as this whole thing went to go through. They filed a petition, and of course the defense attorneys thought this would be a great thing. The county just rejected it, and then it surprised the defense. But the state's position was that these cases, this is Sowell's case, is exactly why the state has a death penalty.
Right. Yeah, from the cruelty and barbarity of the crime itself. Now, in terms of, and we'll give everything away here, but the despicable and deplorable Anthony Sowell, of course, he tries to defend himself. What are some of the attempts? So, how did he attempt to defend himself? How did he go about that in terms of what was his strategy for defense?
Well, it was to impugn the surviving victims. It was, they try to say, these victims, again, the survivors would have, they were subject to dubious honesty, and drug users' characters are not always stellar. As he said, they had many problems with substance abuse. They tried to paint them as crazy, and it wasn't, I got to say, the defense did a good job. They never really were abusive to these. They did it with some sensitivity, if that's possible. But it was the best they could do. I mean, they didn't. They could not keep this from going really off the rails. I mean, it was a really, really ugly trial. It was terrible. They did put Anthony Sowell up on the stand. Without being, there's a mitigate during the mitigation part of the sentencing. Anthony Sowell offered a very half-hearted apology. This isn't like me. That's what he said.
Right.
But it was the first time the public got to hear Anthony Sowell talk. That was very interesting. He said, "This is not typical of me."
What did you conclude after hearing and knowing of his crimes and hearing what he had to say?
He was a cold-blooded killer. He was just trying to, he was doing the best he could, but he was just a bad guy who did a really bad thing, and bad things should happen to him. I mean, it's bad. I mean, it's an interesting that we have a justice system in which the killing is part of the justice system. That's odd, and so that's a matter of opinion. Everybody has their own opinion on the death penalty, but all you could think is, there was it evoked anger. I think it evoked anger from everyone in that courtroom when he testified.
Right.
He did himself no favors.
No, and a lot of people felt with this trial too that their complaint was, and maybe it's a common one among a community of 80% black people, that nobody cared about these black people. Nobody cared because they were black. And you say maybe it was partially racial, but really it's maybe more about class than anything else.
I think it was more about class. That's right. That's exactly right. It's if you're poor, you live in the wrong part of town, a crime isn't is not going to get the attention and the resources that a crime in a better part of town is. Simply because of the rarity of the occurrence. Speaking as a longtime journalist, you look twice at these crimes that happen in an upscale neighborhood. You say, "Wow, that's weird." Well, unfortunately, sadly, crimes in poverty-ridden parts of town are not weird. They're common. And the idea in reporting is you try to report something that's out of the ordinary. And that's an element of news in a way. So yeah, it's a sad fact, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that maybe the police would look the other way or fall down on the job. It's easy to say they did. I don't know that they did. I couldn't make that judgment really. When we lay it out, I lay it out pretty heavy in the book, and I think it's for the reader to decide.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're in retrospect, everybody's a genius, and we can all solve it in retrospect.
Of course.
But there is big lapses and gaps in judgment and assessment, and these things should have been done and those things should have been done, and we can go on endlessly in debating, because we're not going to do that. But you do an admirable job of painting the picture of reality, what it really is, what was it really like, and what's always interesting, and this is not the only book. There's many examples of these so-called prostitutes coming forward with these incredible tales that could have derailed these serial killers at least earlier and maybe avoided a few victims, and the few is very important. Any victim saved would have been important. But they have no credibility because they do drugs. And that's, I think, even more disturbing to me, is that,
It's true. I mean, you just didn't have anybody credible coming forward and saying they were attacked because he didn't attack credible people. He didn't really know credible people. And so, and I think that's this is common among serial killers that prey on in their own neighborhood, and you find that a lot more with black serial killers, of which there are quite a few. They tend to prey on people in their own neighborhood, and because they know they aren't going to be missed, that kind of thing. And I think also they prey on someone that they despise themselves. They don't like that element in their neighborhood. They feel there's always that thing where you feel you're doing you're helping You're helping the neighborhood. That kind of thing.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to tell you too. This book is a real, like I say, I'm on my seat for the whole thing. Lots of books, there's a lot of foregone conclusions. This one, don't take anything for granted, because just turn the page and something else will happen. And you've done a great job of bringing the reader right into the characters of this book. And it's a sad story. There's no happy ending, really. But it's an incredible tale, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the program and sharing this story with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You got a great show.
Tell us a little bit about, you've got a couple other books, your Girl Wanted, and you're co-author of Slaying in the Suburbs, and you have a website. Maybe you can tell us about that. And
yeah, it's www.avalanche50.com. And I'll be posting some stuff on as we crank up, for the press for this book. I'll be putting some documents up there that are cited in the book, and perhaps some more photos as well. So you can go there and see some extra content. And I'll also be just talking about anything that comes out of this, any kind of press, and just to keep track of public reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting too. Is that I said, how can I not heard about this? And it was the Casey Anthony case, and I went, oh yeah, that overshadowed everything somehow. And again, it's just what we talked about, race and class. It's like, well,
it's true. It's exactly right. And I remember I was heading down to Cleveland to cover the trial, and I thought, I'm not seeing this on TV at all. And then boom, it hit me. I am seeing Casey Anthony though.
Mm-hmm.
Much weaker.
It's the same here too, and it's marginalized people. People in this city said, "Well, how come I didn't hear about that?" Because it's marginalized people. That's why. And
that's exactly right.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, of course, right. Well, it sure did. And again, the title of the book, Nobody's Women, is because I, came right from the start where I felt this is terrible because these are really nobody's women. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And so hopefully we explain a little bit, that they are human. They were human beings, and had people who loved them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Steve. People have been listening to Nobody's Women, The Crimes and Victims of Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland serial killer, with my special guest, Steve Miller. Thank you very much, Steve. Have a great evening, and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks again, Dan.
Good night.
Good night.